Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Interviewing Wednesdays. We're very glad you're with us on this cold icy day here in the DFW area. It is February 23rd, 2022. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please just open up the chat window. You're welcome to put your comments in there, and we'll get your questions answered at the end of the presentation. For those watching on Facebook right now, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please just put your comments into the chat window or the comment field, and we'll get those questions answered for you. Please note this event is being recorded. It's currently live on Facebook. The recording will be on the Career DFW Facebook page and the Career USA YouTube channel for others to view in the future. By participating in this event, you give consent for your name and picture to appear. Please note that any comments you put in the Zoom chat window do not appear in the recording, and you're welcome to put in your personal information so that you can connect with other people who are on the call today. And hopefully you will go and do that and connect with them on LinkedIn and be part of what's happening. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Morris. Back in 2008, I started a website called careerdfw.org. In 2012, I started a second website, careerusa.org, to help those around the United States. I have written a book called What I've Learned About Your Job Search That You May Not Know. It is available on Amazon. Since 2007, I've been facilitating and leading the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. I'll tell you about our upcoming program at the end of this session. The group's been around since the late 1990s. And since 2017, I've been a member of the Practice Interview Team. Practice Interview Team is a great way to practice your interviewing skills. I do not see, all right, well, let's see here. So normally Mark McDonald will go and talk about the Practice Interview Team. I don't see him on the call today. A bit of a thing, we had nobody volunteer to be interviewed today at 1 o'clock. So what we will be doing is we'll be replaying a webinar that Tony Beshara from Babich Associates did for us last fall about the top 10 mistakes that he sees in recruiting. Tony is he owns and runs Babich Associates, the oldest and largest recruiting firm in the Southwest. And he'll share with you the things that he sees people do wrong. So we'll get to that in just a second. Let me talk a little bit about the Practice Interview Team since Mark's not with us today. The Practice Interview Team is totally free. You're welcome. All you need to do is send a resume and a job description, and it doesn't have to be a job description that you're currently applying for. Let's say you find a job and it's out in Spokane, Washington. You go, that would be a great job, but I'm not going to move to Spokane. Send that job description in along with the resume. Mark will go and send it out to all the interviewers that he's got. 2 or 3 interviewers will volunteer to interview you. The whole key to this is practice early, practice often. It's just one of those things where the more you practice, the better you will be, maybe 3, 4, 5 times if you really want to get good at what you're doing. Just send your resume and job description to dallaspickcrew@gmail.com, and let us also know what day you'd like to be interviewed. Tuesday at 5:30, Wednesday at 1, or Thursday at 3 p.m. Here's Mark's LinkedIn profile. If you want to link in with Mark, you're welcome to do so. Mark does teach on one particular item, or he will coach on one item, and that is, why did you leave your last job? If you have a tough time knowing why or how to describe or what happened, this job or prior job, if it could be a problem, you can reach out to Mark and he'll be glad to help you. All right, the rest of this presentation is recorded, so we will let you see the recording. It's about 45 minutes, and we'll get back. If you have any questions at the end, we will answer any questions you have.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, Tony. For the rest of you, Tony is a member of the I Want to Help Job Seekers Club, and also does it free of charge. And you might want to pick up his book, Acing the Interview, which has a lot of aces of diamonds. Those diamonds are inside that book, a lot of things, a lot of questions, a lot of things to consider. You might want to pick that up. Anyway, what do? I like to help people with interviewing skills as well, but I do it a little differently. I do the fundamentals. It's like in basketball, if you can't dribble and you can't shoot, why play the game? So we need to learn how to dribble and shoot. In golf, you got to learn how to hit the ball. If you can't hit the ball, how are you going to do anything? You got to know how to do the fundamentals of just about anything that you're involved in. And so you do the same thing in interviewing. So I like to try to teach the differentiation, how we can do that, how can we differentiate ourselves positively from those other candidates, and how can we sell ourselves? So everybody pretty much understands that an interview is a sales situation and that we're selling ourselves. And when I ask people, what does that really mean? I get these long pauses. And so I suggest that we are selling who we are, what we do, and how we can help. Many interviews are on the I do side, a little bit maybe on the characteristics and soft skills guys, but I really don't see a whole lot of selling the value that we bring to the job. So that's the I help side. So I like to help with the fundamentals of doing that. I like to ask you questions out of the 11 basic categories of questions so that you can practice those. How do you handle types of questions? What kind of strategies, option, approaches, structures that you might be able to use in responding to that type of question? And responding always depends on three things. What's the question, who's asking it, and where are you in the process? So that's what the workshop does. It's free. A lot of details are on my LinkedIn page. You can register by sending me an email at my Yahoo email address and ask for some availability dates. It's a very informal process. It's a learning interview more than a mock interview where you're going to be graded, whatever. We're just trying to improve our skills and be different from those other candidates in a very positive and memorable way. So send me an email. I would love to put you on the registration and get you schedules so we can have a little bit of fun. And I call it learning without squirming.
Today, Tony Beshara is with us. Tony owns and runs Babich Associates, an outstanding recruiting firm here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I got my last job I got through Babich Associates. I really, when you hear about certain firms, it's like there's the good ones and there's ones you're not really sure of. If you can find something at Babich Associates, it's definitely worthwhile. So Tony's going to talk about the 10 biggest mistakes that people make in interviewing. Tony, thank you for being with us.
It's always a pleasure, Jeff. You're kind to do it, and we really appreciate what you're doing for the community.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to briefly discuss the top 10 mistakes that people make in an initial interview, and then we'll take any questions that you might have. I've prepared this for a number of different venues, so we'll go through some of these really quickly. There we go. I've been doing this since 1973. I've personally placed more than 11,000 candidates on a one-on-one basis. I've probably gotten more than 100,000 people interviews in that period of time. I've written 4 best-selling books on how to find a job. We have a 60-hour online program that we recently rewrote called thejobsearchsolution.com. I am the president of Babich Associates. We are the oldest placement and recruitment firm in the state of Texas, probably in the Southwest. We do everything that you can imagine except healthcare. We don't do any healthcare. We do banking, finance, accounting, sales, you name it, we do it. 99% of what we do is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, some Austin, some Houston. So the mistakes that people make in the interviewing process, these are simple mistakes and they're simple to deal with. The first biggest mistake is that they think that they forget that an initial interview, especially all interviews, but especially the initial one, is a selling situation. So many candidates come to me with the idea of they think it's a consumer product. They are looking to, well, what do they want and how do they want it and who do they want it with, instead of recognizing that what they need to do is be selling themselves. And I tell people all the time, you sell yourself until you get to the altar. Until then, nothing matters. And until you get a job offer, nothing matters. So the idea that I'm buying and I have to be concerned about what I'm going to get out of the deal doesn't mean a darn thing until you sell yourself. If you give them enough good reasons of why they ought to hire you, they're going to give you plenty of good reasons of why you ought to go to work there. And if you have it in your head that you're selling, selling, selling all of the time, you won't have a problem. The second one is people have a tendency to think that this is a two-way street. I heard it this morning from a candidate. Well, it's a two-way street. It's not a two-way street. There's the hiring authority, and in this market, there's an average of 14 candidates that are all trying to get the same job you are. It is not a two-way street. It's a 14-way street. Until you get to the altar, it's not a two-way street. Now, once you get to the altar and you want to try to exchange nuptials and try to get together, then it becomes, what can you do for me in the process? But until then, it's not a two-way street. If you give enough good reasons of why they ought to hire you, they're going to give you plenty of good reasons of why you ought to go to work there, and you can worry about that later. I had a candidate the other day, even after my coaching and my teaching. Sometimes I wonder, what the heck? But he goes to the interview and he's halfway through the interview and he says, by the way, what does it pay? Yeah, he already knew what it paid because I told him, but he wanted to hear it. He said, well, I just wanted to hear it from the, no. What they can do for you questions, forget them. They're going to answer all of those once they have an idea that they want to hire you. Oops, I'll get this right in a minute. Okay, people have a tendency to focus on what they want in a job. Don't worry about what you want in a job. You got to focus on what the employer wants in the job. If you give an employer what he wants or she wants, then they're going to tell you what they can do for you. If you don't like what they can do for you, you don't have to take the job. We say it here all the time. You can't turn down an offer you don't have. Quit focusing on what you want. I get candidates all of the time and I ask them, what are you looking for in an opportunity? And my goodness, they'll have a litany of things that they want. But then when I ask them, well, what are you going to do for a prospective employer? Well, I'm a good employee and and they hadn't thought of that. And that's the most important thing they ought to be thinking about, not what they want in a job, but what does the employer want in the job? And then the fourth mistake is they don't know what they're really selling. I can't tell you the number of candidates I've interviewed over the years where I say, okay, now what are you selling to a prospective employer? Well, I'm a good employee. I'm just a good employee. Well, how do you know you're a good employee? Well, everybody I've ever worked for said they really like me. Well, yeah, but what specifically are you going to be able to do for them that the other people they're going to interview can't? Well, I have to think about that. Yeah, you really do have to think about that. And you've got to come down to absolute specifics. And I tell people you've got to, in fact, I told this to an employer yesterday, the hiring authority is so wrapped up in his process of interviewing, they're going through 5 different kinds of interviews, that the hiring authority is forgetting to look at the candidate's track record. And what the candidate has got to sell is, I have been successful in my past. Here is where I have been successful, and therefore I'm going to be successful for you. And the more specific that a candidate is about where his successes have been, in fact, I recommend the more numbers that you can associate with your success. I increased sales. I collected debt. I somehow come up with as many statistical uh, issues as to why and how you've been successful. Something that's measurable. Something that I'm just a good employee, that doesn't tell people anything. If you say, I haven't missed a day of work in 14 years, and I've gone the extra mile because I volunteered for this committee and we got this done. The more you quantify things, the better off you're going to be. So you got to know what you're selling. And Jeff brought up something earlier that is really important, that you got to practice this stuff. It does not come naturally. And I teach it in our job search solution program, and I know Jeff does too, and your all's program does, but you've got to have a lip load of presentations of every job you've had, what you've done, how successful you were, and then communicate the idea that it's going to also be successful for them because you've been successful in the past. The fifth mistake is they can't bridge or articulate for the employer their specific abilities. Rarely are you ever going to run into a job that's exactly like the job you've had. So you have to bridge for the hiring authority. I claim that you've got to make the bridge for them, but you got to do their thinking for them. You've got to be able to say, now look, I was successful in this job. Here's what made me successful in that job. And from what I understand, what you are looking for or you need in the job you're interviewing for are the kind of skills that I have. Here is where I've done it before. And you've got to make that bridge for them. You've got to articulate not just what you've done, but how it applies to what they want done, and literally do their thinking for them. The sixth mistake, poor communication skills. I'm not sure. I don't know. Poor body language, not leaning forward in your chair, not animating enough in the right way. We have a whole course on this in our job search solution. I can't tell you the number of candidates I've seen lose out in deals because of their very poor body language. And it's not because they're sloppy, it's because they're scared. Look, next to death of a spouse, death of a parent, death of a child, coupled with divorce, the fourth most emotional thing we do is look for a job. And it often shows up in the interviewing process. They slouch, they don't speak clearly, they mumble, they don't look people in the eye. And I realize in many professions, it's not common to, I mean, you can get away without looking people in the eye. But in the interviewing process, you can't do that. And as we mentioned earlier, you got to practice this stuff. It does not come naturally, but those communication skills have to be strong. They don't necessarily have to be animated, and they don't necessarily have to be forceful. It's nice if they are, but just as long as you communicate and you make sure that you're communicating the right kind of thing. Answers to questions can be short, and answers to questions could be right to the point, but they have to be the right answers. And it has to come across as interested and professional. And over the past few years, lots of dressing differently. When I got in this business, everything was coat and tie. It is in our organization too. Every day, coat and tie. But things have changed a little bit, but still slouching and not speaking clearly and mumbling and that kind of thing, people will get lost in the manner in which you speak more than the matter of what you do. Seventh mistake is improper dress and poor body language. I mentioned this a little bit ago. Don't assume everybody's casual. Don't assume that just because I had a candidate show up in a coat and tie, a dress, a suit, and I'll be darned if the guy that was interviewing him wasn't wearing flip-flops and cutoffs. That doesn't matter. You go dressed like you're looking to borrow $1 million. Is somebody going to lend you $1 million? Even if you overdress, it's better to overdress than it is to underdress. And even to this day, I've had candidates go in with a golf shirt this happened the other day. Guy goes in with a golf shirt that was checkered or something. I don't know. The employer said, and then he had a sport coat over it, and it just looked terrible. It looked like the guy just had the sport coat hung up in his car, and didn't matter what he was wearing. He just put the sport coat on. The hiring authority was so distracted by that, he claimed that the candidate was disrespectful because he didn't dress the right way. And it got in the way of the quality of the candidate because he was actually a pretty good candidate. And he said, well, his excuse was, well, when I even go into the office now, even though we used to not work from, we used to work from home. And if I go in dressed like I'm looking for an interview, like I'm looking for a job, they'll know. So I put, but well, okay, fine. But if you're going to do that, explain to a hiring authority, look, I came from work. We dress casually there. You can dress casually in a nicer way where it doesn't look so weird as it looked in this particular case. And the hiring authority was so distracted by the whole thing, he never heard what the candidate had to say. And this was a 15-year experienced guy. So it wasn't some kid right out of school. Uh, the eighth mistake is not researching the company or the position that a person's interviewing for. You would think, with all of the information that we have available to us, LinkedIn, the internet, I mean, my goodness, there's more information out there than you can possibly imagine. I am shocked that even after I teach candidates or sell the idea of do your research on the company and the person you're interviewing and all of that, it's just amazing that people just show up and say, well, I just really haven't had time to go and look the research up, but tell me, what do you do here? And I'm talking professional people that have been around for a while. Look, if you don't show enough interest in the opportunity to do the research on the job and the person that's in it, I've had candidates that have called people in the company to find out about the job, connected with other people that have worked there before. I had a candidate not too long ago. He had read some white papers that the company published. He knew more about the white papers of what the company had published than the guy that was doing the interviewing. And the guy that was doing the interviewing was pretty impressed by that. He said, I learned a lot about my company from your candidate. The guy did the research. It's not that hard to do. It doesn't take all that long, but you just don't look very interested in what you're applying for if you don't do that kind of thing. The ninth mistake is the inability to articulate what you'd like to see in a new job. Now, I'm not talking about money and benefits and parking and PTO and all of that. No, no, no. I'm talking about when somebody asks you, what are you looking for in a job? It's very important for a candidate to come up with intrinsic growth. I'm looking to grow intellectually, spiritually, intrinsically in an opportunity. I'd like to learn more. I'd like to be pressed a little bit. I find in some of the jobs that I've had before, I learned them and I didn't grow personally. You need to be able to communicate where you want to grow personally in a job. Because the truth is, if you're not growing on the inside, intellectually, from your heart, spiritually, in a situation, you'll, after a while, not very interested in the opportunity and you won't work very hard. The kind of people that are most successful are the kind of people that figure out how to grow mentally and spiritually in their job. And so you need a couple of answers to that. What I'm looking for in a job is an opportunity to grow spiritually and mentally, and I want to be challenged. And from what I understand from talking around and doing my research, people can do that here in this kind of organization. That's why I want to be a part of it. And then the 10th mistake, they badmouth their present employer or their past employer. And common sense would tell you that you don't do that. Okay. But I guess common sense, even after 47 years of doing this, common sense isn't very common. I just can't, and I warn candidates because when I interview them, they'll say, my company is this and my boss is that. And I realize there are a lot of screwball companies out there. There are a lot of screwball people out there. But you don't go in and talk about your past employer in any other way other than I really respect the people that I work for. I've enjoyed the opportunity. I've certainly learned a lot. Here are the reasons that I'm looking to leave, and they better be good business reasons. But bad mouthing your employer, saying negative things about them, a hiring authority is going to think and assume that whatever you say about the people you've worked for before, you're going to eventually say about them. So no matter how horrific your situation might be, unless they've stolen money from you, and even then, I'd be careful about that. Always have something positive to say. One of my associates here calls it a compliment sandwich. You say something positive about them, and then you give them a reason that is reasonable that you might be leaving for, and then another positive statement so that you couch whatever your reasons you are looking to leave in a positive way rather than a bad mouth way. And then there are also some things that you gotta, these are kind of minor. Discussing personal problems in an interview. Well, I'm looking to leave because I'm going through a terrible divorce, or I'm suing my last employer. I had a candidate just last week. The interview was going so well. And he said to the hiring authority, well, I had to sue my last employer for the money that they owed me. Ah, end of interview. What do you think an employer is going to think about that? And this guy, what's so funny about it is he threatened to sue him. He never really did sue him. He's still at the same place that he was. He threatened him a year earlier. But do you think an employer wants to hear something like that? They don't. Being late for an interview, if you're in the Dallas Fort Worth area, you got to know that wherever you're going to drive to, you got to get there a half hour earlier because we don't build up, we build out. And this is flat. And LBJ is crazy. The toll road is crazy. Every place you drive to is crazy. You got to be there early. And I even have candidates that drive to the place the night before just to be sure that they can get there. And don't necessarily rely on Google Maps. It can take you the wrong place and then you're late. And then, of course, once you're late, not apologizing for being late. I bet this happens even with my candidates, and I deal with professional salespeople, semi-professional salespeople, and that they'll show up late and they won't apologize. I mean, you wouldn't do that anywhere. And now, don't go overboard. If you go in and go, oh my God, I'm late, I'm so sorry I'm late, and all you do is talk about being late, you'll go overboard with it, but apologize for being late. Not closing the interview properly. We've talked about this on this program before, but there are 4 basic questions you have to ask in every interview. They are, first of all, have I made it very clear what my experience and my background is? Does anybody have any questions about what I've done and where I've done it? Lots of people will act like they know what you're talking about in an interviewing situation, but they don't understand. They don't want to appear ignorant, so they'll act like they understand. You'll walk out of the door, and then they'll go, I didn't really understand what the guy was talking about. So you ask, are there any clarifications I need to make about my experience or my background? Secondly, how does my experience and background stack up with what you're looking for? If I'm in your shoes, what strengths and what weaknesses might I have? Do you have any concerns about my ability to do the job? And then number 4, how do I stack up with the other candidates that you've interviewed? And get a really good idea and stop. And then the 4th one and most important one, what do I need to do to get the job? Now, I get candidates all the time that say, well, what if I don't want the job? You don't know whether you want the job or not until you get an offer. We had a candidate not too long ago that went into an interview for a controller's position. The job paid $175,000. He sold himself so well, they offered him $275,000. So you got to do it right and sell it right. Those four basic questions, they're killer questions. They are ones that you absolutely have to ask in order to get the job. And if you do a good job of that, if nothing else, you know exactly how you stand. So those are the 10 biggest mistakes that people make. There's a much broader presentation about this in the jobsearchsolution.com. So, any questions?
Yes, Daniel, why don't you unmute your mic and I'll let you ask your question.
Yeah, sure. So when I do company research, I can find a lot of general information about the company, but sometimes I want to ask specifically, like, so what does your team do? What's kind of the specific focus you're doing beyond the job description? Is that going to make me look like I haven't prepared well, or is there a good way to ask that?
No, that's not a bad way to ask it. You got to put it in context.
Mhm.
It depends on how many other questions you might have, the rapport that you might be having with the interviewing authority or that kind of thing. That's a fair question, because no matter what anybody publishes on their website, or no matter what anybody tells you, even in the lobby, there's always going to be a hidden lots going on in the company that you may not know about. That's a reasonable question. That's a reasonable question.
All right, thank you.
John's asking, can you please restate the 4 questions at the end of the interview that you want to ask again?
Sure. And the job search solution goes into these things in real detail. But the first one is, have I made it clear about what my experience is? And do you have any questions about my experience or background that I didn't make clear? Interestingly enough, although the other 3 are more pointed, that is probably one of the best questions you can ask, because I'll tell you, when people are asking you questions, they spend, I don't know, but it's probably 50% of their time thinking about the next question rather than what your answer is. I know employers that I work with that don't even take notes on the candidates they interview. I mean, that's crazy. You interview a candidate 2 weeks ago, unless you take copious notes, you don't remember who you talked to. You just don't. So lots of times you'll explain what you do and you think you've communicated, well, they know what I've done, but they don't. And you got to ask them, have I made it clear? So are there any questions about my experience and my background that I need to elaborate on? And I guarantee you, there's going to be one of those people in that group, or one person that's going to say, yeah, this job you had two jobs ago, I don't really understand what you did there. Can you explain it to me? So that's really an important question. Then the second question is, do you have any concerns about my ability to do the job? Now, what you're going to find out there is, how are you stacking up? Are you long in some areas and short in other areas? Do you have, do they have any concerns? I had a candidate this morning. She asked that question, and it was a Zoom interview. And the group that she asked it with, one of them said, well, it doesn't appear in your background. I place primarily IT salespeople. It doesn't appear anywhere in your background where you've done financial application demos. And she said, oh, yes, I have. Well, part of their job is, as a salesperson in this company, is to be able to do WebEx demos. And this guy didn't get the idea that she had done that before. I guarantee you the other 3 people in that interview didn't get that idea either. If he didn't get it, they didn't get it. And so she was able to say, yes, in this job I had, and she pointed out the job she had, she said, I didn't even understand the software, and I learned it within a couple of 3 weeks of how to demo it. So asking that question about where am I strong and where am I weak is basically what you're doing. And then, how do I stack up with the other candidates that you've interviewed? Most employers don't know how to answer that question because they never get asked it. You would be surprised. You would be really surprised. I had a candidate ask that the other day, and they said, I don't know, you're the first one we've talked to. Okay, that's fair enough. But at least they'll give you an idea of how you stack up and, about the other people that were talked. I had a candidate a couple weeks ago ask that, and they said to the candidate, well, your skills are really good. We do have an internal candidate that we really like. Well, now what that tells the candidate is that an internal candidate most of the time always has an advantage because they know the person. They probably aren't as good as the candidates that, frankly, this sounds self-serving, that I can come up with. I can probably come up with better candidates than what they have internally, but they know the person. So my candidate knew then that he was up against an internal candidate he was going to have a hard time fighting that battle. And then the last one, and just real blunt, what do I need to do to get the job? And you'll be shocked at the number of people that you ask that of, that they just start laughing and they go, man, that's a good question. Nobody seems to ask that question. Now, the irony to all of this is I give people my job search solution, and out of four, on average, out of four candidates, even though I teach it, only one of them asks all of those four questions. I don't get it. I just don't understand. You need a job. I'm telling you some of the things you need to do to get it, and only one out of four asks it. And when I ask the other three, why didn't you ask? Well, it just didn't seem appropriate. Well, I wasn't quite sure. Well, we ran out of time, blah, 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 blah. What it means is you just didn't have the courage to find out, where do you stand? Look, when you're looking for a job, no is the second best answer you can get. If you're not going to hire my candidate, let me know now. The sooner you let me know. I may not agree with it. I may not like it, but at least I know. No is no. That means we move on to the next one. Yes, no, those are great. It's that maybe that kills you. And that's where people spend most of, even I do, after all these years, spend the emotional time and effort in that maybe. So, and if you're not a candidate, that's fine. Find out quickly.
It's that age-old question of they want you to talk about salary before they tell you what the range is. So how do you eloquently skirt around that?
Great question. Get asked that all the time. Here's what I would say as a candidate. In the past, in my last job or my present job, I'm presently making, or I've made, X amount of dollars. I'm not as concerned about the amount of money as I'm concerned about the opportunity, the growth, and the people. So tell them what you've been earning, but don't say, this is what I'm looking for, or this is what I need. Now, this is a paradox, and this is screwball, but in the state of California, and I'm not sure if it's true in New York, but I know in the state of California, you can't ask people what they've been making when they're in the interview. Now, after you go to hire them, you can find out what they've been making. Now, that's stupid, because if they've been making a lot more than what you're going to pay, then they're not going to get hired anyhow. So, I've had candidates, I say, what have you been making? And they say, I don't want to tell you. End of interview as far as I'm concerned. That's not going to fly. They may have reasons for doing it. They may not want me to know. Usually it's because they feel like they've been grossly underpaid. That has nothing to do with it. It has to do with, if I ask that question, in my business, I'm going to have to tell my client, because they're going to ask me. And the candidates in the same thing. So don't tell them necessarily what you're looking for. Just say, this is what I've made in the past, but I'm flexible. If I've been out of work 6 months, I'm real flexible. If I've been out of work a year, I'm really, really, really flexible. If I'm on my present job and I'm leaving for maybe different reasons, I may not be as flexible, but they don't need to know that. This is what I've earned in the past. I'm open to the future. Whatever you do, and some guru I listen to stuff all the time on the internet about getting a job, and some yahoo was on there was saying that when you get asked that question, don't answer it, just ask the question, well, what does a job pay? Ugh. Any question that has to do with what are you going to do for me is a stupid question. Please don't do it.
So I've got a question for you. So of all the placements that you all make, that Babich makes, what percentage of jobs do you already know what the salary is so you can prep the candidate when you're sending them in?
99% of them we know, and we're able to give them an idea what the range is. Sometimes people listen, sometimes they don't. And we try to make it reasonable for the candidate, and the employer knows that we're going to do that. Sometimes employers tell us wrong. People, I read it in a book not too long ago, because I'm reading this kind of stuff all the time, that companies are going to publish the mid-range of the salary. That's not necessarily true. I mean, they're going to publish whatever they publish. Just handle it by being just careful. You're going to have, most of the time, somewhat of an idea before you go in. What you don't want to do is price yourself out of the opportunity, because there might be some really growth there. If money was the most important thing that people worked for, we'd all sell cocaine. I mean, it's ridiculous. So you answer the question by, this is what I've made in the past, but I'm interested in growth, and then stop.
Okay. Leslie, do you want to ask your question?
Okay, so I wanted to know what kind of an answer could I expect from asking, what do I need to do to get the job? I had no idea. What are they going to say? Are they going to say, you need to do this, this, and this, and do 3 leapfrogs? I had no idea.
Yeah, pat your head, rub your belly, and sing the national anthem. No, the issue, don't worry about the answer. The answer isn't anywhere near as important as the fact that you asked the question. They may not even have an answer. It's going to be an answer of some like, well, we've got 22 other candidates. I'm being facetious. We've got a few other candidates that we're going to talk to. We feel like that you have provided us all the information that we need, but we appreciate your asking. And then you can even come back. Is there anything else I can do to enhance my position? The fact that you had the guts to ask it, and that you're willing to say, you're going to hire me or not, puts you in a light that is more courageous than most candidates. Most people are afraid somebody's going to say, nah, you're not going to get hired here anyhow. Well, okay, fine. I mean, you're going to get 14 to 15 no's before you get a yes anyhow.
Just another little story. In the pit crew, we had a candidate once who and he came back and told us that after the interview, or during the interview at the very end, he said, I saw that empty desk out there. Would that be my desk? And the guy sort of like chuckled from it. And actually he did get the job because he took it to the next step.
I had a candidate one time that interviewed with the CEO. It's now a $1 billion company. And the CEO said, it was not that big at the time, we'll let you know. And he one Monday morning, he showed up, went to one of the empty desks, opened up his briefcase, set his whole desk up. The CEO walks in and says, who's that guy? And the admin told him, she said, he's your new hire. He said, oh, okay, I guess so. Guy was there 15 years. He never really got offered the job. He took the job. Now, that's pretty gutsy, but you know, he made their decision for him. He wound up being a really good guy for the company. It takes guts. I don't know that I'd recommend that, but I mean, what's the worst? They throw you out. I mean, you know, so what?
Right.
I had a question about next steps, interview closing questions. Do you have any recommendation about how to ask those?
Sure. If depending on the answer you get from what do I need to do to get the job, I have some candidates that soften that by say, what's the next step? I don't like that because what they say is, well, the next step is we're going to have people back and we're going to do this and that and the other thing. Well, okay, then you might ask, how do I be certain that I'm going to be one of those? Okay. And look, you might as well be aggressive. Most candidates aren't. And they call me back and they say, well, they told me that the next steps are they're having people back next Tuesday. Well, are you going to be one of them? Well, I don't know. Well, you know where you stand. And, you know, what do I need to do to get the job? What are the other steps in the process? And am I going to be in? And you can say it nicely with a smile on your face. Am I going to be in that group that comes back to speak with you all?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Sorry about that. I've got too many things up on my screen here. I couldn't unmute my mic. So yes, go ahead, ask your question.
This is about asking questions, but it's not about the 4 that I would ask for me. And this may be out of scope. Tell me it's another session and I'll, retract it. But when you're going through the interview, you're trying to understand the value of the role. For example, is it a new position or is it a backfill position? What's the value of the role? What happened? What's the worst thing that happens if you don't fill it? Trying to discern the value. A lot of times people can't talk value. They just talk about activities and tasks. Talk about that if it's in scope of this session.
So what you're saying, what you're asking about, I don't know if I got what you're trying to ask. Give me a short question again.
During the interview, before you get to the end, the questions we've been asking about and clarification, if you're in the middle of the interview, I kind of view, and you can correct me if my mental model is wrong, but I kind of view it as they're interviewing me, but I'm interviewing them. I may learn something about the company or the role that wasn't clear in the job description, and I don't want it. So to pull that out of them, in the middle of the interview, asking them about the value of the role they're trying to fill. Is there any questions that you know of that are better asked in that situation about the value of the role, backfill? Is it a new position? I don't know if that's any clearer, but that's.
Walt, do you want to take this one?
Certainly, I'll be glad to.
I mean, I'm trying to put them on the hot spot, interviewing them just like they're interviewing me.
Well, here's the deal. Tony talked about a two-way street. Now, I agree with his definition from an offer standpoint, but I'll redefine that saying it's a two-way street for us to find out if we want to work there as much as they want to find out if they want to hire us.
Yeah.
So we certainly can ask questions, and that's the two-way part. My suggestion is start working and understand yourself, the value that you bring to a job. You've got your own list. You have a history. You have some records. You have R's and the results of star stories that represent the value that you bring with your activities. I suggest very strongly that after the first question, you ask a question, and it's help get their interpretation and saying, what is it that I can do for you in the next 6 to 9 months to say I've done an outstanding job? You are asking them, how can I help you? It's a way of asking. You can ask it in other ways. I won't go into it right now, but just asking that. so that you can sell to the value, but find out. You can also analyze the job description. When you look at a job description, sometimes they will have you do some sort of activity, then it'll follow by words like in order to, ensuring that, all right? That next few words is going to be the value of that activity, what kind of results you bring. So you train people so that they become more effective and efficient in this particular process or particular piece of work or whatever, you know, that's going on. So yes, you definitely want to ask and get their ideas of the value that you can bring.
Yeah, I think the whole, you know, you just have to remember when you're in the interview process, it's not what the company can do for you, it's what can you do for the company. You have to stay in that mindset. How can I help them succeed? They have a problem. You're a problem solver. What kind of problems can you come solve for them? They're not hiring people because they have extra cash and they just want to have more people on payroll. It's because they have an issue. What is it that you do? So if you need to, and you need to ask those things out there. Mike asked a really good question. How do you advise we respond to the trap question, tell me about yourself? Yeah, the short answer is, if you go to the Career USA YouTube channel, you can see a whole session about how to answer that question. But Walt, do you want to give us a shorter answer?
Well, there's several outlines that you can use and ways you can, you know, introduce yourself. Since I focus on the I am, I do, I help model of saying, how can I tell them something about myself that shows them a little bit about who I am, shows them a little bit about what I do, and a little bit about how I can help, plus a few other things right up front, all within about 90 seconds. I don't really see it as a trap question. I see it as a question. They want to get to know us a little bit. This is our chance to show how articulate we are. This is to show our communication skills. This is to show our personality in the way we talk and how we say the words. So if you have genuine interest, enthusiasm, some excitement about the job and the company, all of that's going to show through in that response. My suggestion is explain to them, for example, my first item would be, how'd you get into your career? So just tell me why you are a project manager. What happened so that you're a project manager? One person said, I've been in construction ever since I built a doghouse in the 3rd grade. Something that says this, I love doing this work. With my experience in, and you just mentioned a couple of pieces of experience relevant to the job, and my 2 soft skills, my determination, my focus on customer satisfaction, I can help you achieve, and then you give an example value. So I can help you achieve higher customer satisfaction. For example, would you like me to tell you about a time when and then you mention R and result in improving customer satisfaction. You can go ahead and tell them why you left your last job, make it short. Tell them why you want to work here. Give them 2 reasons why you like this job, why it motivates you and energizes you. 2 reasons why you want to join this company. Why is it better than all the rest? At least for today, right? But what is it positive about those 2 things? Then you can say, now that I've told you something about myself, then you ask the question. There's 2 of them. One I've already told you about, what value can I bring? The other one is, who are you looking for? What are the top 3 characteristics for a person to be successful in this role? So that's just a kind of a little outline that says, I've kind of covered these things right away and I've answered those questions. You can certainly include your certifications, your education background experience, or something in that, particularly if it's really highlighted in the job description. But just come up with a little description that gives them some information, shows them who you are, a little bit about what you can do, and certainly include the value that you bring, which is the weakest part of the interviews. We just don't bring a lot of that. Does that help?
Yeah, good, Walt. Rusty asked a question. When interviewing with a privately held or family-owned company, what's the appropriate way to ask about their financial health / sales volume?
Anybody else want to talk besides me?
Anybody else address that? Paul, I know you've interviewed with several different privately held companies. How do you go about asking that question?
I just asked them if they're in a position to be able to talk about numbers, or if they're willing to talk about revenue and size of the company. And some companies will and some won't.
John, you've had the same issue. Is that something that's cropped up for you?
You could bring it up in your responsibility. Say in my current role, I had $500 million of responsibility, or responsible for a P&L of 20 million, whatever it might be, to size it up. If it's specifically for you, you want to make sure that you're able to do the job. You don't want to come in and say, I've had a responsibility for $5 million and it's a $2 billion company. So you want to make sure that you're asking the question to help size and position your skill set.
Great. Thank you all. I know both of you all have interviewed with privately held companies and stuff.
What if you
Let's,
what if you open that up a little bit to say, where do you see yourself now, and where do you plan to be with this company in the next 3 to 5 years? And that may include financials, it may include objectives, size. It can tell you maybe a whole different way of answering that. You may not get financial numbers out of it, but you might get employee size or growth size or customer size or whatever. Just an idea.
right. All right, Jeff asked on here, I often receive emails from prospective employers, and often the job is vague, and often the company is not named. The email says they found my resume on a search engine like Monster, et cetera, and want to schedule an interview. I'd like to know the name of the company and the job at least. Is that a fair response to an email question like this?
Short answer, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you should, if nothing else, be able to get a job description, because how can you have an interview and not know what you're supposed to talk about? How do you, how can you prepare? So, do that. But one of the questions I would always ask when they would, reach out to me is, what was it about my resume? What was it that you saw that was of interest? Because now you know what sparked their interest, and maybe that will help guide it a little bit, guide the interview.
Thank you, Jeff.
There's a lot to that answer depending on who's sending the email. Is that a contingency firm? Is that an exec, outplacement type firm? Not outplacement, but an agency for, is it internal from someone internal in the company? Do they identify themselves in that email? I'd rather, if they identify themselves, I'd rather try to call them than I would, and then just write back in an email to respond. But knowing who they are is going to really kind of gauge the kind of response that I might give to that. But it is fair to ask people, do you know anything about the company? Do you know anything about the job? Have you placed people there before if they're a recruiter? How do you see this role into this particular, do they know what the history is of the role? Do they know the culture of the company? Do they, you can ask all these types of questions to a recruiter, and there's nothing wrong in you knowing these types of things. And you might get anything from a person who simply is recording your answers and sending it to someone else and has zero knowledge, been in recruiting for a whole month, or to those who are glad to help you with information because they see and giving you that information is going to help them and you get that job with that company.
Well, Walt, thank you for that. This email is for a financial services education company, and it's signed with a name, and it's Commander U.S. Coast Guard retired. And he does have his name.
He does? What's his role?
I'm sorry?
What was his role?
It says that he came across my resume, wanted to see if I was in the market for a new opportunity, and that he runs a financial services education company, and they are outstanding. And would I be interested in a 45-minute interview? And so, he gives me his name, and it's his name and then his title or his.
All right. Is he on LinkedIn?
U.S. Coast Guard, retired.
Is he on LinkedIn?
I found a lot of his same name, but I didn't find a name like his with that U.S. Coast Guard or anything in history like that.
So what about a response that says, really sounds interesting. I'd be interested in having a short call with you to discuss. Then the way you're not agreeing to an interview yet, you want to find out some more information.
Yeah.
Then if they're interested, give me your phone number. And all of your emails, just a sidebar, all of your emails should have a signature line.
Right.
It tells you your name, your phone number, your email address, your LinkedIn address, all that to make it for people easy to contact you. But anyway, what do you think of that option?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely respond to that. And I think Jeff's suggestion as well about how, what about my background interested them. So yeah, I'll respond. Definitely.
Yeah. Tell him, you said, yeah, I'd love to schedule an interview. Can you give me a call so that we can discuss? Because you'd like to know more about what you're getting into before you actually schedule it.
Sounds good. Thank you both.
All right, one last question here. Somebody says salary, W-2 or 1099? Anybody like to tackle that one?
I'm not sure what the question is. Are you asking contract job or full-time job or?
Yeah, well, I mean.
Yeah, it's Kamani. So usually when I have to answer that question about the salary, I end up getting the numbers from salary.com. Now, most of those postings, would it be a W-2 position or a 1099? And if it was, how would you make the comparison?
Well, I think I've always heard that if you're a 1099 employee, that means you're paying both sides of the taxes, you're paying your own insurance, you have to file a lot of extra stuff that you probably should be getting maybe 25 to 35% more than what you get as a W-2 employee. So in most cases, I think you always want to be a W-2 employee if you can, because that way you don't have to mess with filing quarterly taxes. If you don't, it's just one more hassle that you're going to have being a 1099 employee.
Okay.
Are you asking that when you put in a salary, they are asking you, was it a W-2 or a 1099 salary?
Usually, look, I'm trying to give the answers with regard to what was mentioned about my previous position. And most often they want a number out there each time I've had to interview. So the best resource I have had besides that is to use the salary.com to answer that question. And I would give them the mean number of a position that I'm looking for. But again, now have got back to them. They have got back to me asking me, okay, what would you consider for a W-2 position or a 1099? And I've never worked at a 1099, so hence, how much more should I add to the rate?
Okay. Right.
Anybody else out there? I mean, do you have a better number? I mean, 25, 30, 35, 40%? I mean.
At least 25.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
At least 25 more. All right, well, thanks everybody for jumping in on these questions and stuff. Like I said, hopefully next week we'll be back and we'll have a candidate who wants to volunteer to be interviewed. If you'd like to be interviewed, please send a resume and a job description in to Dallas Pit Crew and we'll get you scheduled for an interview next week. Career DFW and Career USA, we're putting on training 4 days a week. Hopefully you'll join us for that. Tomorrow, being the 4th Thursday of the month, we will talk about networking. Tom Jackson will be with us to talk about his process and what he learned and what he has applied in his networking experience. This Friday at the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group meeting, Elizabeth Lyons will be back. She was with us about a month ago, and our conversation with her sort of got off to how do you vet a company? So she's going to come back and we're just going to talk about how do you vet a company? What kind of questions do you ask about the company when you're to that point of trying to decide, is this a company who I want to work for? This session has been recorded. It will be on the Career DFW Facebook page and the Career USA YouTube channel. on the Career USA YouTube channel, all these 13 lessons, everything, all the questions you've asked today, we have a detailed instruction here. Walt Glass and Mark McDonald put together a 13-part session, about 20 hours of material. You're welcome to go through and go back and watch any one of these videos that you'd like to have more information about. The first 5 lessons are all about what do you do before the interview, how to prepare, star stories, video interviewing, how to analyze a job description. The next 5 lessons are what you do during the interview, interviewing opening, what's your opening statement? How do you close at the end? Discussing compensation, asking questions in the interview. So all that's there in the middle 5. And then the last 3 are just some advanced topics that you're welcome to watch, sort of help get you through the interview process. So if you have any questions about any of those, just go to the Career USA YouTube channel, click on playlist, and then find the playlist that says interviewing. And then down below, where you don't click on the video, but click on that red arrow where it says view full playlist, and up will come a list of all the different titles and dates and topics. And you can scroll down and you can find the lesson that you'd like to go back and watch. If you're not receiving emails about our workshops, you're welcome to join the Career USA mailing list. Just send an email to Career USA, +subscribe @groups.io. You'll never be spammed, but what you will get is the topic of the day, the title of the day, and most importantly, the Zoom link of the day. That way you can just click on the link, grab your lunch, and join us for a session. Please remember, Career DFW, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. All of our speakers or volunteers are all here to help you land your next great opportunity. Please consider making a donation when you get your next job. So thank you for joining us today. Don't freeze out there, stay off the roads, and we'll see everybody tomorrow for networking, or Friday morning, or one day next week. Have a great week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Everybody.